Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula 1 but from a photographer's point of view.
Breaking news, while editing this vlog, I found out that Sebastian Vettel has announced his retirement from Formula 1 at the end of the season. This has come as a big surprise to me. At this stage, we don't have many details about what he plans to do in the future or who's going to be driving for Aston Martin next year. I'll keep you up to date as things develop.
Round 12 takes us to Le Castellet in the hills around Marseille. The French Grand Prix. The circuit was built in 1969 by Paul Ricard, the pastis magnate, and it held the French Grand Prix from 1971 to 1990. The race returned to this track in 2018. There was a cloud hanging over the event because it looks like next year we won't be racing at this track. This is partly to do with the quality of the racing. Since Formula 1 has returned to the Paul Ricard circuit, the races have been rather dull. Part of this is due to the track layout. The Paul Ricard circuit is often used as a test track, and there's actually 169 different variations of track layout that can be had here. And unfortunately, the one they've chosen for Formula 1 doesn't produce very exciting racing. Part of this is to do with the position of the pits. Where they're located means that pit stops take longer here than at other racetracks. Teams tend to opt for a one-stop strategy rather than a more aggressive two-stop strategy, and drivers need to preserve their tyres during the race. So they're less inclined to be adventurous and aggressive. The way the track is laid out doesn't give the drivers many opportunities to overtake. All of this means that racing can be quite dull here. Coupled with that, there's the question of the track ownership. Currently it's owned by Bernie Ecclestone. He is the former F1 race promoter, and he has a very complicated relationship with Liberty Media, the current promoter. And additionally, the location of the track makes it very hard for fans to get to. It's in the hills outside Marseille and there's only a few small roads that have access to it. This leads to long traffic jams, especially on race day. In previous events, it's taken up to 3 hours for people to do what would normally be a 30-minute journey. Along with that, you have many new venues coming along offering substantially more money than the French Grand Prix is willing to pay. All of this means that it's very unlikely that we'll be racing here again next year. The signature element of this track are the blue and red lines along the edge. These are partly decorative, giving a nod to Paul Ricard pastis, but they're more functional than that. They're made of a very abrasive material, so when a car goes over them, it slows the car down considerably. You can see how effective they were in Charles Leclerc's crash, where he went off at a very high-speed corner, but slowed down considerably before he hit the barrier. It was exceptionally hot at Paul Ricard for this race weekend. This plays havoc for photography. Not only is it uncomfortable for us to walk around the track with our cameras, but it also generates a lot of heat haze, and that's very hard to photograph through. It distorts and blurs the photographs, creating an almost abstract artifact. The paddock. For each Grand Prix, there's always something a little bit different in the paddock. There's always something to give it a bit of a local identity. For the French Grand Prix, we had a beach bar created by Le Boho. This is complete with sand, deck chairs, and a bar serving rosé. One of the brands of rosé they're serving was Miraval. This is famously owned by Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. When they separated, there was a huge bust-up over this estate. Angelina sold her shares, and then Brad sued to prevent her from doing so. A few days ago, the judge ruled in favor of Angelina Jolie. Regardless of the backstory, it's still a great wine. It wouldn't be France without fresh pastries. And in the paddock, we had our own bakery, serving croissants, cookies, and all sorts of delicious delights. Even though the drivers have 5-star catering at the paddock, a lot of them stopped off to enjoy the croissants on the way to the motorhomes. To try and increase fan engagement, especially for the fans that can't actually attend the event, Formula 1 has been trying a new thing where they've got these self-propelled monitors and TV cameras that whiz around the paddock looking for drivers to talk to. In Silverstone, we had children with severe disabilities, and at this race there were a number of young refugees from the Ukraine war. Here's a photograph of Carlos and Charles talking to one of the refugees. Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton always arrives at the track wearing something fabulous. For this race, it appears that he's wearing something slightly conservative by his standards, just wearing a lime-coloured vest by Reigns. However, he has managed to match that with an entirely transparent pair of trousers. Before the start of the race, we have the drivers' parade, where the drivers do a lap of the track to wave and greet the fans. At this race, the drivers did their laps in classic cars. Lewis had a superfan as his driver. If you look closely down her arm, you'll see his logo and stars for each of his championship wins tattooed down her arm. She was over the moon and he was really touched. There was a beautiful moment between the two of them at the end of the lap. I spoke to her afterwards and she was absolutely buzzing. The Green P. On Thursday, before the start of the race, Sebastian Vettel and Martin Brundle drove Aston Martin's iconic 1922 TT1, also known as the Green P, for a single lap around the track. Aston Martin founders Leon Martin and Robert Bamford designed the car based on a 1500cc single-cam Rob engine. It first raced in the 1922 French Grand Prix in Strasbourg. 100 years later, it was great to see the old Green P roaring around the track. The remarkable thing about this demonstration was the car was running on fossil-free fuels, designed and developed by a company called P1 Racing Fuels. They did a similar demonstration at the British Grand Prix when Nigel Mansell's 1982 car was driven by Vettel using their fuels. The fuel is produced by biological waste generated by agriculture, plus green hydrogen and captured carbon from the air. This is a potentially great solution to reduce CO2 produced by vehicles. The other real advantage of this fuel is that you don't need to modify the vehicle in any way. So regardless of whether it's a high-performance 1992 Formula One championship-winning engine or it's a historic 1922 engine, it just works perfectly. I'm really excited about this technology, and I hope that in the near future we'll have an affordable alternative to fossil fuels. It was great to see how excited Sebastian Vettel was about this. He's a passionate environmentalist, and it's great to see him using his platform to find a technology that could help the world. Mick Schumacher. As you might have seen in one of my previous vlogs, I really like trying to get a photograph of a car and a helicopter in the same shot. This is another track where it's possible, although it's quite difficult. On the exit of turn 1, if you get really low and your timing is just perfect, you can get a shot of the car coming over the ridge and a helicopter shooting past. With the south of France setting, there's something James Bond about this photograph. Unfortunately, Mick didn't have a particularly good race. He finished 15th, which is a bit of a letdown considering his 2-point scoring finishes in the last 2 races. The driver's market. We're going into the time of the year which is often described as a silly season in Formula One. This is when drivers' contracts are renewed or ended. One of the vulnerable drivers is Nicholas Latifi. He's been in Formula One for 3 years and really isn't performing to the level that he needs to. He's been comprehensively outperformed by his teammates in the past 3 years, and there doesn't seem to be any signs of improvement. There are 2 drivers in contention for a seat. First is Nick de Vries. Nick has won Formula 2 and he's the current Formula E champion. The other alternative is Oscar Piastri. Oscar is an exceptionally talented Australian driver. He won F2 and F3 in his first go. That puts him in the same category as people like George Russell and Charles Leclerc. We'll have to wait and see which of the 3 drivers Williams selects. Mercedes. In my last vlog, I suggested that Mercedes might do quite well at Paul Ricard. It's a track that they've run well at in the past. This is a shot of Lewis exiting the garage. I like this angle being very low down and getting a great perspective of the car. This is a shot of George Russell flying up the Mistral Straight during the race. I use a very slow shutter speed here to give a sense of movement and blur out some of the trees. Mercedes did better than I think anyone expected them to do. They got 2nd and 3rd in the race. And their car was probably the 3rd fastest, so they should have got maybe 5th or 6th. But they've capitalized on everyone else's mistakes and they've produced a really good result. This is a photograph of Lewis dousing George in champagne on the podium. If you look carefully, you'll see that there's no branding on the champagne bottle because in France, you're not allowed to advertise alcohol. Ferrari. I don't know what to say about Ferrari. Let's start with Carlos. Carlos had to take an engine penalty at the start of the race. If you remember in the last race, his engine blew up and there was a big fire. So for this race, he started at the back. He did really well. He overtook a lot of cars. He looked very fast in qualifying and in the race. Unfortunately, when he came in for his pit stop, there was some confusion, something went wrong, and the mechanics didn't release him quickly enough. And then when they did, they almost released him into an oncoming car. Had he hit that car, it would have been disastrous. There's a chance that he would have crashed into 5 or 6 McLaren mechanics. After the delayed pit stop, he looked very strong on track again. But while he was overtaking Sergio Perez for 3rd place, he gets this radio announcement saying, "Come into the pits." And it was at the worst possible moment where he's fighting for a position on a very tricky part of the track. And you hear him screaming into his radio, "Not now, not now, not now." He overtakes Sergio and then goes and pits and has another slow pit stop and comes back way down the field, eventually fighting back to 5th place. There probably wasn't a need for that 2nd stop. Pierre Gasly was on a similar strategy and he managed to complete the race with only 1 stop. So Carlos lost a potential podium because Ferrari was being overly cautious. But that was nothing compared to what happened to Charles. Charles looked unstoppable on Saturday. Getting pole position, he looked mighty. He led from the start, held off Max Verstappen for many laps. Max then went into the pits, and I think Charles felt that he had to really push on that lap. And unfortunately, he pushed a little bit too hard and spun and crashed and was out of the race. Now, these mistakes are starting to happen far too frequently. It's highly unusual for a driver to spin out in the dry. The last time somebody spun out from the lead of the race was in 2005, Fernando Alonso, and before that was probably 1999. So something at Ferrari is going wrong here. This is the second time Charles has spun this year. They're possibly putting too much pressure on themselves. This is causing the drivers to make mistakes. It's also causing mistakes in strategy, and they're pushing their equipment too far, as we can see with so many mechanical failures. I really hope the team can turn it around. It looks like they have the fastest car, but they're just not executing well at all. The summer break might be coming at the perfect time for them. They can still win the championship if Charles wins every race from now on. But he now has a 63-point gap between him and Max. And considering he's probably lost about 70 points through bad judgment, mechanical failure, and poor strategy, he really should be leading this championship. Max Verstappen. In contrast to the chaos at Ferrari, everything at Red Bull seems to be going completely smoothly. Max is driving with a new level of self-confidence and self-assurity. He's still driving incredibly fast, but he's almost driving slightly within himself. This is going to sound alarm bells throughout the paddock, because if you look at this race, he didn't have the fastest car, he wasn't on pole, but yet he managed to pressure Charles into making a mistake and then won the race with ease. That's quite an ominous sign for the rest of the season. Thank you for watching my review of the 2022 French Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week we're off to Budapest and the last race before the summer break. There are a lot of subplots to keep your eye on. How's Charles going to bounce back from this disastrous weekend? Was Mercedes' result just a fluke, or have they turned the corner with their new upgrades? Can drivers who are struggling, such as Daniel Ricciardo, Nicholas Latifi or Lance Stroll, produce a result that saves their season? And can anyone stop Max Verstappen? If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Till next week, goodbye.